Peter, do you want to say anything about the Derrida archive controversy? Or
Sure.
the students might find it really
Yeah.
interesting. Because it is a case of
Yeah.
sort of journalism meeting blogging and it
In
being a
fact, when I was sitting in the third row so that I could see what you were showing, I also decided, okay, yeah, I shouldn't self-censor me. If these people can count to 10, they will notice that I didn't give all the 10 reasons. And so this is one of them. Earlier this year, I blogged something that actually for once was newsworthy. And I think it's great that you don't censor yourself, but there's always some kind of self-censorship, and there's also massive censorship from elsewhere. And it doesn't just go away if you turn off the comments or if you make it less interactive of a medium than it can be. In this case, I work on Derrida and I work on his work on archives, and the Derrida archive is here, was located here, and there was something of a controversy about what's going to happen to his papers after he died, because he had started building up an archive here for many years, but not including the most recent 5 years, because that was stuff that he was still actively working on, lecturing on, and so on. I posted something on my blog, since it was one of the things that I was blogging about, and then also published an article about how UCI and widow and sons of Derrida were not agreeing about how to conclude this kind of deal, how to deal with the remaining materials. And there were various complicated things, such as interest finally from France in also having an archive in France of his materials, which doesn't mean that it couldn't be here. Obviously, these days you can have copies of things in both locations, and not everybody needs to travel across the ocean to see this. But anyway, it was something that I didn't intend to be inflammatory at all. It wasn't that I was trying to attract any positive or negative attention or traffic, right? And there are people who blog in an aggressive and maybe even calculatedly offensive way to do that. That was not at all the intention. It was just one of my fields of interest. I've been working on this for more than 10 years. Following this, I used to come to Irvine for the Derrida archive long before I was hired here, and it blew up in my face. And the only thing that protected me from actually getting some serious repercussions, I think, was that that day I got to this room, I got to say something in front of people for a conference that Barbara Cohen and I had organized, and so I was kind of in a, I was dressed up, I think. Maybe I was even wearing a defensive tie.
No way.
But I was yelled at in my office. The dean has never entered my office before, but she ran to my office and basically broke down the door and yelled at me. This is a dean who's not here anymore, so I can say this. But she knows very well that she got very angry about it, and I was very concerned that here's a dean who's extremely angry at me, because she thought that that was not something that somebody who belongs to this institution should not criticize the institution, any part of the institution. And it wasn't even a post that criticized UCI or criticized the library. It just criticized the fact that this is difficult to resolve. You don't sue the widow of one of your most famous faculty members over the archive. It's like, who else is going to give UCI their papers if the message is that the widow can be sued, right? We resolve it some other ways, right? And as it turned out, it made national news, and it was in the LA Times, it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Through really no doing of mine. I mean, I was not the deep throat. I was not the first source, but I was one of the few people who agreed to be quoted and to be on record. So if you're not shy and not afraid of media, then it can and will blow up in your face. And it is one of the 10 reasons why I stopped blogging.
I was actually contacted by Jennifer Howard at the Chronicle, who ended up writing the article, and I think I was one of the unnamed sources about that, but I specifically chose not to write about that, just like I chose not to write about the law school incident earlier, because I get contacted and asked to go on record, and I always say no. So I do censor a lot of what and in fact, I think I actually commented on your post on the Derrida thing. A comment saying, I have no comment on this. But just because people kept on, because if you Google a lot of UCI related things now, my name turns up, and people kept contacting me about the Derrida thing, so I wanted something somewhere saying, I'm not saying anything about this. But yeah, I mean, you're right. There has to be a certain kind of discretion. You know, you don't write about your advisor, for one, or you only write very flattering things.
It's one of those things where, you know, you have to decide whether you're going to suppress something, right? Like I'm not thinking of myself as a citizen journalist. I don't even know. I often get asked by newspapers, because I work on new media, what they should do with their contentious article that has attracted hundreds of comments on their website. Should they, you know, turn it off? Should they? I always advocate, you know, as much freedom of speech as possible, or more than possible. In fact, that's what we should advocate, particularly as academics. But at the same time, I thought, okay, the blog is no longer going to be my best avenue for this, because I had an article coming out about this anyway. So, you know, that's, as an academic, that's the format you work with. You work in academic articles, book chapters, etc. And that, you know, the reason I blogged it was basically that I was, you know, announcing to myself and my one other reader that I was going to have an article about this eventually, right? It's not said in exactly that, but it's one of, you know, it's one of the things I've been working on for more than 10 years. So why not? You know, so it's not even that I then censored it and now I'm shutting down my blog because I got yelled at. No, I published this where it should be published, namely in an academic venue, and the blog, you know, it doesn't have to continue. It doesn't have to pursue that.
Don't you think that academic venues have to become blogier? I mean, I'm very frustrated by the years that it takes for academic things to come out. I edited over the summer a collection of very short position papers on the topic of Shakespeare after 9/11, and you know, the project was begun very late in the game, and it won't appear in print until 2009 or late 2008, and yet it's like a bloggy topic. How has 9/11 affected the reading, staging, response, teaching of Shakespeare? And I would love to be able to throw those statements up by some very interesting people in my field up on a website and be able to have some responses, public and academic.
To me, I'll put them on the ballot.
Unfortunately, Shakespeare Yearbook has the copyright. I can't do that. So, I mean, the contributors shared their comments with each other, and so we know what we've written. But the thing is going to be so old by the time it actually comes out. So I would love to see, some venues, and I think this relates to what I was saying earlier about the printernet and the way in which websites can support traditional print, which I think has a great value both visually and in terms of its forms of stability and a whole lot of different things. But that if things could, if we had, and I think that trade publications have figured this out, so that books have websites and these forums and structures that can be updated, and errata can be listed, and there's this, so there's this kind of internet envelope for trade books. So we don't have that in academic publishing. So I love the Valve thing, your example of these book events. And then people actually read the stuff, and they might even buy the book.